Hey everyone, welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdarchist Ted, and today I'm hanging out at GenCon with special guest Andreas Walters. And today we're going to talk about monster design that's system agnostic. Jump down to the description below where you can sign up for Nerdarchy, the newsletter, get weekly gaming tips, as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy. All right, Andreas, do you want to, tell the lovely people out there who you are, where they can find your stuff?
Yeah, so I'm Andreas Walters. I am the creative director of Metalweave Games, and you can find my stuff at metalweavegames.com or even the Baby Bestiary or babybestiary.com.
All right, so today we're going to talk about monster design, system agnostic stuff. The Atlas Animalia is a great book that you wound up doing a PDF insert or PDF attachment with all the stats for the monsters that are in the book.
Yeah.
So you made it for 5th edition. Did you make it for other game systems as well?
Yeah, so we're actually currently in progress of making those. Right now we have Shadow of the Demon Lord that's already done. We have some Pathfinder in the works right now, as well as a couple other systems.
Awesome. If we're talking about monster design, and we're not looking at rules first, what are the kind of things that you decide to look at? Where do you go?
Where I usually go first is usually the ecology. Being an environmental studies science background, I usually look towards the environment first and what natural creatures would fit in there. So having played like Numenera back in the day, when I was writing systems for that, I was looking at my travels through like Colorado and Utah and stuff like that for like the unique environmental work, and then like how can I make this weird, and using that as inspiration. And so for like Atlas Animalia, we took a lot of inspiration from actual creatures and then hybridized that with the traditional creatures of Dungeons and Dragons, since most of them don't really have a place in our current ecology. Like some of them are tied to mythologies that fit very well in their specific ecosystems. Like, the Greek monsters usually fit in Greek areas or Greek designed areas, but you can totally flip that on its head and be like, well, what does a insert monster fit in this other climate? Like, what does a hippogriff look like as like in the snow or the tundra versus in the desert? And so you can just pull on those variants, and then you can just augment that magically too. Like, is a blue dragon involved in this for the desert, and build on that.
Now we did a similar conversation with Sarah, who's the illustrator artist of Atlas Animalia, and she talked to some points, and you guys made some awesome stuff that's there. But do you ever take it and say, okay, well, I want to have this kind of threat, or I want this type of monster, and then work backwards? Or do you always start at, okay, this is where the thing is, I need to make sure that it's not unbalancing the ecosystem, or oh, it's so big and it's in this area, why has it not destroyed the towns?
Yeah, there are some creatures that have definitely been like, how do I want to create this cool badass thing that totally fits my idea, and then backpedal from there of like, oh, maybe how does this impact the environment? And of course there's always some hand waving in that too. Like certain hydras are like, yeah, the ecosystem would be destroyed by the time this thing like got hungry. And for some of those, like our aquatic hydra, like we really like put our heads together of what kind of weird combination of sea creatures could we put together, like a squid, a dolphin, and God, who knows what else, to make this an anglerfish, and a shark or something like that, and like have that concept creature, and then totally play with it. So like one of them, like the Chimera, we did like the forest, and it's like, okay, what kind of forest creatures are there? All right, we got the green dragon, the grizzly bear, and then like the moose. And I don't think it's actually the moose. It's probably like some other horned creature. But like taking those and just running with it, and then like make it dragon-like, and like you can fit that to like the old Arthurian tales of the dragon and fit that in, and so that you can totally backpedal. And there's a lot of hand waving because yeah, you can lore it out and talk about how it affects it. And oh, maybe they are extremely territorial and no other predators exist in this area. Maybe they feed on whales or something. But
well, I mean, you can take a creature and say, okay, well, this thing, it eats, but it's got a slow digestion process, and it will consume bone matter and fur, and it has such a great system that maybe it actually uses every little bit, and therefore it doesn't need to eat as often as other creatures. Like, if you really care about those kind of details, like, you can really get in there and hand wave.
Oh yeah. So then for that, just with that example specifically, you could make it hibernate, so you have like long periods of hibernation, whether it be years or ages, and then you could say, oh, this is why adventurers know about it or don't know about it, why there's legends. And then the other thing, like, oh, if it eats everything, you can make it more bird-like, where it like throws up pellets of whatever remains and just kind of lying around in different areas. Something for the adventurers to be like, what's the... Oh, God. That's a mass of bones, and is that a magical sword?
So getting into the mechanics of it all, like, how do you approach and say, well, I want to do a system agnostic thing, and then say, all right, now I've got the lore. And do you hand that off to other people, or do you sit there and say, okay, well, here's the 5th edition stats, here's the Pathfinder stats, here's this other thing?
So we usually try to, in the lore itself, we try to build out what its abilities are. So like for the cockatrice, like the Peacock, or like the basilisk, the water-running basilisk, we had to really like gauge of like what does its eyes or its like petrification ability actually do, and to what extent. So we had to kind of describe it and how would it be different with other types of its kind. So like, oh, maybe it doesn't work as far distance, or maybe short distance, or it works only on smaller sized creatures, like maybe it only affects small mammals or insects, or in the case of like the basilisk, it would use it to freeze fish and birds. So it could then, or like it would be a paralysis effect. And so with those descriptions, then I can hand it off to a designer, and they would just be able to be like, okay, well, here's the base cockatrice. Like, we can tweak it a little bit and do our own take on it, but from there, we can really use the lore that's already there and just kind of build right into it, making it pretty seamless for at least a designer to work with.
So beyond the stuff that's in the Atlas Animalia, have you made other creatures that aren't based off of other D&D or mythological monsters, so that you have a fresh start, a fresh building block to work with?
So not quite. I haven't. Well, the closest take that we've done to like something completely different would be our Dark Souls inspired Embers of the Forgotten Kingdom.
Okay.
book. And that's a lot more into characters than it is into creatures.
Okay.
But there are a number of creatures there, but you could also say there are inspirations. You can always look up to an inspiration somewhere.
Absolutely. All right, so in the Atlas Animalia, there's a lot of great creatures. Do you have a favorite, specific one that you really enjoyed, either from a design perspective or just this one is just awesome?
From the Atlas Animalia, the spotted hippogriff. It's a black cockatoo with the yellow pearls on it. And being a bird lover and having grown up with birds, the black cockatoo's always been like a really pretty bird. Obviously, its bite will take your finger off, but as a hippogriff with like the feathers and the head crown that cockatoos have, same with cockatiels, is just such a pretty animal, and it's probably one of my favorites.
All right, so if you wanted to take, that cockatiel, and say, all right, forget the hippogriff, forget what's in here. Let's take that thing from a design standpoint, and let's make him 6 foot tall. Let's make him that serious, credible threat that a full-sized avian would be. Where would you go with that?
I would first off, non-magical wise, you would go first off into like, what are these claws doing? What is the beak doing? And then from there, I would look at what magical effects would work with it. And like, I want to start branding it. Like, what does this thing do? What makes it interesting? Is it like a harbinger of death? Is it like, how is it perceived? For like a black cockatoo that's 6 feet tall, Jesus Christ. Because like, my first thought was like the golden eagle and stuff like that. But something that large, I would, do like a huge tie into death, kind of like the Kirin. Perhaps give it some sort of death sense ability, or even mimicry, as an ability, larger size, some larger intelligence, can talk. And then using the spots on its wings and the blackness, you could probably do some sort of necrotic or some sort of color effect as well, using its wings or like a gust ability or some control over weather.
I like having monster conversations because they can always bend and twist, and it's like, okay, if I'm thinking a bird, I'm like, okay, well, I am not a huge bird lover, avian fan. I think they're cool. I've got great stories that I'm not gonna bore you guys out there with. To me, you could go with it's just a physical. Like you could have the higher intelligence, and you could have the flyby attacks, but my brain did not in any way, shape, or form jump to what kind of magical abilities can I give this thing? What kind of terrible powers can this thing have? I mean, a bird of that size, I mean, its claws are going to be large, it's going to be sharp, and it's going to be able to cut through. It's going to be able to cut through people like hot knife through butter. Commoners would utterly flee in terror from such a creature.
Here's a cool name: an unignited phoenix.
Okay.
And then you can totally do like not a black phoenix or something like that, and just do a total version on that, being a phoenix that reborn that can never be rebirthed or something like that. Or you could totally do on the dark side of it in terms of like hunting down phoenixes on itself, or being the yin and yang, being the death side of the phoenix. Sorry, total tangent.
No, it's fine. I mean, that's the great part about monster conversations is as the ideas come, like you just spit them out there, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have to make tweaks. Sometimes you have to say, okay, well, I've got this really great idea, but it needs fleshing out. And you might run that creature through multiple play tests. You might be like, all right, well, this ability is too strong. These stats are just not right. I need to tweak them. And if you're designing it, especially if you're looking for system agnostic, make it in one set first, figure out its bugs, and then say, okay, well, how does this translate, over to that one? Like, there are birds out there that I think are cool. I've got stories on my honeymoon with feeding finches that were just wild finches. Mm-hmm. I always find that the birds that have vibrant, colorful feathers, there's an appeal there. So like to me, I would be like, well, what can I do with a peacock? What kind of magical effects, as you're talking about, could you do with something like that? What about a flamingo? Talk about a weird structure with the long legs and the bending weird. Where would I want to go with something like that?
Mirror image. There's a million of them just on your lawn.
So like, where would you take any of those three? Of those three, which one would you pick? And then what would you want to do with it?
The finches, my first thought goes to piranhas, just little piranhas of the sky, which would be devastating.
So like, off of that comment, to me, that's like, okay, we've got a finch swarm.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They come in like locusts.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So you have like a shadow plane locust swarm of finches.
So there you go. Let's make that happen. All right, peacock or flamingo. Where do you pick? Where do you go?
Peacock. The first thought is obviously dancing lights or color spray. You want to do something. You could do something like confusion with the eyes of the tails. Always what's fun also to think about is what can you do with the parts of these animals. Like when you go to Hawaii and you see like the traditional headbands that are made of these bird feathers, mm-hmm. It's like, oh, what can this do? If it's made of that, like, because we love always, it came from something. We love that, this ring was forged in the fires of Mount Doom. We love where things came from. And so knowing that, this was made by the feathers of some creature, like it imbues it this power, we can draw some power out of it, and so that always brings more inspiration into what can build from this creature.
So I like creating both, good and bad monsters. So I see the peacock and I say, okay, well, what if it's a prophetic thing? Mm. All those eyes on the feathers, it sees everything. It has the ability to occasionally, when it's, manifested or what have you, it can leave you with a single feather, which becomes a usable item that Okay, well, maybe you can use it to cast divination or scry or any of these
Even
other
true seeing, yeah.
all these other sight-based or divination type effects, and you can go in a lot of different directions with it. And flamingos are just weird. Where would you go there?
I would almost say like I don't know. Balance is probably not a spell, but sort of like kind of like the cat's grace, like the being able to balance and not fall in anything. So that would be totally one thing. God, they're such a weird creature in general. Because I mean, they eat like krill, so which makes them pink. But outside of that, they like doing the mating walks in herds. They're just a odd creature. We'll just leave them in Florida where they belong.
So, like, you could have a creature that again, imagine if you were to, grow. Like, how long would those legs be? Like, it could be like a serious nuisance because it doesn't have a concern for that which is below it. So maybe as opposed to this thing being 6 foot tall, like we did with the cockatiel, maybe it's a giant. Maybe these things
60 foot.
maybe there's an area that like these things live, and once a year, once every 10 years, whatever it is, they migrate. But as opposed to fly, because they're so big, they have to walk. Their wings become vestigial, and they walk across the plains. And like everybody,
that would be a terrifying campaign event to be like, oh, by the way, it's the season of the massive
it's the
flamingos.
It's the well, I mean, maybe in the world, like all flamingos are just that size. Like you wouldn't have to rename it. And it's like, okay, it's migration time. And people are like, well, what does that mean? So if you're traveling and you don't know the lore,
you see
of
the
this
map
area,
with giant feet prints all over.
yeah, and you could, the people who live there, their maps honestly would like you'd have that so that it's designed as there.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, oh well, you don't go there during this time.
Yeah, or like here's the feeding grounds during that time. You don't want to be close to that.
They crest miles and miles, and they walk for days, starving the entire time because they don't have their food source because they've eaten it all at wherever they were. Yeah. So that's where I think I would go.
And then you can tie so much stuff under that too, and then some crazy person wants to like steer one off and crush a town or something like that.
And I mean, all of them are linked with a number of adventure hooks. And, and what have you. Any last points on monster design that you want to share with everybody here?
Take a crazy idea and run with it. Like, it gets more fun the deeper you go with that idea. And like economics, I just remember a talk from Rob Donahue. It's like, in D&D economies, like the farther down the rabbit hole you go, the funnier and better it gets, because it builds out that way. It's like, what happens if this really does? Such as,
Right.
if it is really that big and it does migrate, like, what happens then, Like, there's a lot of, like, the consequences of those big ideas is really, that's where the imagination kicks in. And that's what really inspires you to keep going.
Absolutely. All right, so, thank you for coming on.
No,
and,
thank you.
Talking with us today. You guys out there, if you have any tips and tricks, things you want to share in regards to monster design or doing things in a system agnostic, you know where to go. Down in the comments below. While you're down there, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And of course, until next time, stay nerdy.